Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan H. Lewis, and we have finished day 4 at AWS reInvent. We are in the home stretch. One more day to go. Day 4 was pretty quiet, similar to day 3. There weren't a ton of announcements. There were not necessarily a ton of things going on that were new. There were some interesting announcements, and we had a really great keynote to start off with. So, I broke the categories down today into the keynote and the announcements, and it's about 50-50 in terms of content because there were not a lot of announcements today. But that's okay. I imagine that day 5 is also going to be pretty quiet, if not quieter than day 4. And that's kind of how reInvent goes. You know, things taper off towards the end. They give people a break. Also, they give people time to sink their teeth into a lot of the announcements that came out earlier in the week. But let's go ahead and start with the keynote. And this was a good keynote. So yesterday's keynote was more focused on business. I don't know. It just didn't really hit home. The keynote on day 2, which I finally did end up watching, was very exciting because there were a lot of announcements. But the keynote today was a little similar to the keynote on day 1 in that it was very technical. But the technical aspect of the keynote today with Dr. Werner Vogels, who's right there, the flavor of the keynote today was on the kind of the software infrastructure piece and what people are doing with AWS these days. And I don't know, I found it really, really interesting, really satisfying. So let's talk about some of my takeaways from the keynote. First of all, Werner loves to dance. One of the aspects of the keynote is he mentioned going to Amsterdam and how there's some big dance music festival that happens in Amsterdam, and they're using technology to make it better and I guess make it easier for people to get to the dance festival. I don't know. It was an interesting personal moment for Werner in the keynote, and I fully support it. I love it. He talked a lot about the kind of the new things that they're doing with the hardware to basically do things that no one else can do. Kind of, in some ways, they were talking about their competitive advantage. And this Nitro hardware card hypervisor thing is kind of the key aspect of this. This is a Nitro system is what they call it. And it's an actual physical appliance that they use in conjunction with EC2. And they got to the point where they realized that with all of the virtualization that they were doing, it was taking up basically parts of the CPU that could be used for actual productive things. And so what they're doing is moving almost as much things as they can onto this Nitro system to leave the CPUs for actually doing work for the product. And so the Nitro system is doing like the virtualization, the kind of behind the scenes stuff to virtualize your instances. They're also handling, I believe that it now works with elastic block storage. So any type of IO is going through that as well as I believe the networking pieces. So there's all these things that they're moving off onto this Nitro system, which is basically making things faster and making things cheaper. And he went into links about it. I'm not a hardware guy, so some things I may be explaining them differently, but it was really cool. He also brought up Firecracker VM, which is the VM technology that is under Lambda and Fargate, which is really interesting. It is kind of almost a similar thing. Firecracker VM is really the secret sauce that makes Fargate and Lambda possible. And I love Lambda and Fargate, so I guess I love Firecracker too. So that was interesting. He kind of explained some of that as well. In addition, towards the end, he really focused on what companies were doing in the real world with AWS. And so as a developer, a lot of times when I think AWS, I think it running kind of the web, like Netflix and e-commerce and websites and things like that. But Werner actually really focused on companies that were doing real world things. Some examples that he used was Ocean Drone, who they create drones that basically go in the ocean and collect oceanographic data. And they provide basically more data for ocean logistics and climate change information and all sorts of stuff. And basically they're using IoT and AWS services to really make the fleet work and collect that data. Woodside is a natural gas company in Australia, and they're using IoT devices in their in their plants to basically make it so that human workers don't have to physically go in there and be in a dangerous situation and potentially be injured or killed. They're able to use IoT and basically virtualize these things so that humans can be safe, but also do their job, and everything is powered with AWS. And then Volkswagen is using, again, IoT in their factories to make cars and collect all of this data. One of the key things that Werner said before he kind of introduced all these things is how manufacturing has not gotten to where it should be today, because even though things are being digitized, there's not enough data coming from the real world to be able to do something smart. And so he talks about IoT, and they're doing all these things with IoT, but the back end of that is also SageMaker and AI and machine learning, and they're basically being able to provide the intelligence that is being consumed and trained and processed via the IoT data that's coming back in. So IoT is being used to get the data. SageMaker is being used to process the data and create predictions. And then SageMaker is able to give suggestions for these different areas of manufacturing to improve it in ways that basically was impossible before. And I don't know, I thought that, for me, that was a light bulb moment. I was like, oh, wow, like, look at what AWS can do beyond the web, basically. And I think that is going to be a big, it seems like they're really pushing that. And I think that's going to be something like years down the line that we look back and see that kind of AWS pushed ahead, which is pretty cool. In terms of announcements, like I said, not many announcements, but the two main announcements today were focused around learning, which I kind of feel bad for that they waited until the end to throw these learning announcements in, but I guess I understand how it is. The first of the announcements was Amazon Builders Library. You may be aware that AWS already releases white papers explaining basically how to do things with AWS. This Amazon Builders Library is kind of like that, but a little bit different. First of all, it looks like it's a collection of articles. I'm assuming that they'll add more. There's 13 right now. They're written by Amazon engineers, and they're not necessarily about how to do things with AWS. It's more about how they built AWS, and not specific like we did this and we did that, but like from a principled standpoint of, here is this technical computer problem and here is how we solved it, basically, which is really fascinating. There's so much that you could learn from that, and I'm actually kind of surprised that they released this, because in a lot of ways this is like their competitive advantage, being Amazon and having this great knowledge, and they're kind of giving it away for free, which seems cool. I'm down. Like I said, there's 13 articles right now. Hopefully they'll add more. They're pretty specific about what level they're on. So, if you're not an architect or not some super computer science guru, you can still go in, and there are articles that are interesting and kind of at your level. So that's cool. And this is an image of the current builders library. It's actually quite cool looking. Things are organized according to topic and level, and they have neat pictures and eye proof. they also announced the Machine Learning Embark program. So this is a little, I don't know, not quite as cool. It's AWS-led enterprise training to train people on machine learning. Basically, to me, it seems like AWS was probably going out to their customers and saying, hey, look at SageMaker. This thing is really amazing. You can do so many things with it. And companies were saying, our people don't know how to do machine learning, and we don't know why we need this. And so AWS is kind of trying to hold people's hands. They will take AWS engineers, take them to the company, lead them through how to understand and do machine learning, how to do it on AWS. They include a deep racer event for your organization, so people can try and win in deep racer. And it seems like a cool program. I think the thing that kind of bummed me out about it is I'm not currently at a company, and so there's not a way that I can really get into this, because I kind of think it would be an interesting way to learn machine learning. But it's really kind of a enterprise product, I guess you could say. So cool, but not that cool. And then this is something that I saw on the Twitch stream today. AWS Chatbot. Have you heard of AWS Chatbot? It was something that was launched this summer in 2019. It almost seemed like it was shadow launched, because I had a really hard time finding blog posts about it. And it's amazing. Like it is something that really should have been talked about. It's an ops chatbot for AWS that works in Slack or AWS Chime, which is kind of their business chat video conferencing tool. And what it's still in beta, so it doesn't have all the features yet, but basically you're able to do AWS things in Slack and not have to actually go into AWS, which is pretty cool. At companies I've worked for before, they've had these kind of ops chatbots where they're able to do things, but it's always a third-party tool. So this is basically AWS just building their own. So you don't have to rely on a third-party tool for this. You can perform quite a few AWS actions. I think there's still some kind of sensitive AWS actions, like working with KMS keys, IAM, stuff like that probably wouldn't be very secure to do over Slack or something like that. But there's quite a lot that you can do. And you can invoke Lambdas, which means you can actually really do anything if you just write a Lambda for it. So Chatbot, I haven't got a chance to get my hands on it yet, but this is really exciting. Before this was released, there were 3 vectors that you can interact with AWS. There was the AWS CLI, which a lot of times is extremely verbose and kind of difficult to work with. You've got the console, which is pretty easy to work with, but a lot of times it's not perfect. Like it takes longer to do things in the console than doing it another way. And then you've got the SDK, which requires you to write a bunch of code. This seems like the 4th vector for working with AWS and could potentially be the way that I start working with AWS, because it just seems like it would be really easy. So I'm very interested to get my hands on this and start playing with it. And I will maybe do a video later about what it is and what you could do with it. So, all right, day 4 was really quick. We are winding down the conference. reInvent 2019 is almost over. What'd you think about day 4? Anything interesting? Have you read anything in the Builders Library already? And if you did, wow, you're a fast reader, because those articles are long and they are pretty heavy. Maybe you did see Chatbot earlier in the year and you've played with it. I'm interested to know what you think. My name again is Ryan H. Lewis. You can catch me at Ryan Murakami on GitHub or Twitter. And my site is ryanlewis.dev. And if you've been watching all of the recaps, then here it is again. You can learn AWS from me at Pluralsight. I create courses on AWS and I publish them through Pluralsight. The courses go over AWS from the start. So if you don't know much about AWS, you can learn from the beginning. And we build things in the courses. It's very hands-on. You get a lot of experience. Pluralsight has an incredible library of courses, not just on AWS, but basically any other technical topic that you'd be interested in. And it's a great subscription service. And if you want to check out my courses on AWS, you can follow the link to my Pluralsight author profile. And thanks for finishing this video. I will talk to you tomorrow.